Spotlighting Hawaii's leaders.
We want to bring in Governor David Ige.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Lieutenant Governor, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Mayor Derek Kawakami.
Thank you so much, Senator, for being here.
Spotlighting the issues.
Where is the virus right now in our community?
How much is this overall going to cost the state?
How are you responding to the community's concerns? Talk about the level of citations that you guys are writing.
Spotlight Hawaii with Yanji Denise and Ryan Kalei Suji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Longstrugs.
Hello, well, it's great to see some of you already tuning in here on this Monday morning. I'm Ryan Kalei Suji, joined by Yanji Denise, and this is Spotlight Hawaii on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. This morning, we shine a spotlight on the issue of homelessness and some of the individuals who are tackling that problem in our state.
That's right. We've invited Scott Morishige, the governor's coordinator on homelessness, along with Jill Wright of the Institute for Human Services, to join us this morning to really give us an update on how we're doing as a state on this issue. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you. Good morning.
Jill, I want to start with you. Tell us sort of broad strokes. How are we doing as a state on this issue? Bottom line, is the problem getting better or worse?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, actually, in this line of work. And I think when people kind of are out and about in our community, the thing that they're thinking is it's not getting any better. And in fact, it looks like it's getting worse. But we, because we're on the front lines of this every day, we're seeing that there are actually a lot of improvements being made in homelessness. There's, one of the things that we're really excited about might be too strong of a word, but one of the things that, we were happy to see was that during the pandemic, a lot of people expected to see this surge in new families becoming homeless and new households experiencing homelessness. And fortunately, we haven't seen a lot of that come to play. There's been a lot of efforts in terms of homeless prevention, keeping families in their homes that have been successful. And so while we see a lot of people continuing to seek help, rent relief and utility relief and those kinds of programs, we're not seeing a lot of new homelessness come about as a result of the pandemic. So I think that's kind of one bright spot to talk about. Kind of over the long term, there's some other things to highlight that are bright spots. And one of those is that family homelessness here in Hawaii is down significantly, almost 60% since 2015. And so that is something, that we can really celebrate, that we're not seeing a lot of homeless youth, a lot of homeless children, homeless families on the streets anymore. We've also seen success with veterans and veterans initiatives and getting veterans off the streets. And so when we take a kind of a targeted approach to focusing on a certain population, we do see success in that area. So homeless prevention areas, family homelessness, veterans homelessness, have all seen, some reasons for optimism over the past couple of years.
And Scott, for you, you've been in your position serving under the governor for about 7 years now. What are some of the things that you've seen specifically after the pandemic? We know that there, as Joe was mentioning, there was this, thought that this could become a larger issue than it already was. But on the state level, what have you seen over your tenure and your time in this role, and specifically as of late?
So I think, like Jill pointed out, I think one of the bright spots over the time I've been in this job is we've seen real significant decreases in family homelessness and children experiencing homelessness. As she mentioned, almost a 60% decrease between 2015 and present. And similarly, during the pandemic, I think there was a lot of fear that we would see more families, and especially families with children, start to become newly homeless. And we haven't seen that. I think, and that's largely been because of the effort of our homeless providers to make sure that they were on the front lines every day, offering access to COVID testing and vaccination, but also providing access to rent relief. All 4 of the counties were offering emergency rental assistance for people who needed that help. And I think that made a big difference in helping to keep people in their homes and helping them avoid from falling into a situation of homelessness. So as Jill mentioned, although homelessness continues to be a very visible thing, I think one of the biggest bright spots is the fact that we've been able to reduce the number of families, and especially with families with young children, that are experiencing this issue.
Yeah, Scott, let's stick with that for a second and continue to talk about the bright spots. A 60% decline over that period of time is definitely significant. Do you attribute that solely to the federal money that came down through the pandemic, or what specifically led to that? Was there a targeted effort to address families in particular, or how did the state achieve that success?
So there is a number of factors. I think starting in 2017, 2016, 2017, the state really we looked at all of our different contracts for homeless services. Actually, with the support of legislature, we were able to increase funding for a program we called Rapid Rehousing, which provides short to medium rental term subsidies for people either at risk of falling into homelessness, needing help with homeless prevention, or people who were just newly homeless and need a leg up to get out of that situation. So I think we're able to work with the legislature to increase funding for that program, really scale it out. And around the same time, our partners in the philanthropic community here in Hawaii with the Hawaii Community Foundation worked with providers such as IHS, and we're able to really rally our homeless service providers to think about how do we make a significant difference, especially with families. There's a program called Housing ASAP that came up around the same time. It was really focused on having providers look at outcomes rather than just the number of people that they were serving. The last thing I'd add is one of the biggest things I think the state did is we really changed the way that our contracted providers looked at how they were measuring what they were doing. But again, instead of just measuring the number of people served, we started placing emphasis on specific outcomes, such as getting people into permanent housing, reducing length of stay in homeless programs, and tying that to the funding that providers received.
Jill, I wanted to get your thoughts on the city's new initiatives with CORE and under this new administration, the efforts that have been made to tackle homelessness. How do you think some of the changes in the way that the city is going about has helped this issue, and what do you think is still needed to enhance that program?
Yeah, sure. Our work with CORE, we're very grateful for the work that CORE is doing. I think I heard Jim Ireland recently say that CORE is a non-emergency service designed to offload the work of people doing emergency service. And I think at that, it's done a really excellent job. We have, shared clients that call 911 60, 80, 100 times a year. And that, puts a drain on our system, that puts a drain on the healthcare system, it puts a drain on the EMS system and our taxpayers and so forth. And so, making sure that we're able to address those emergency calls that aren't true emergencies, that are homeless emergencies, has been, a great program. We've outreach teams on the streets for a long time, but they're not able to be nimble in that way that CORE is, in terms of having ambulances and just a coalition of folks that are ready to interact with homeless individuals. But one of the issues that does come up is then what? So if you are able to intervene with somebody and you're able to connect with them, but then having places to bring them has been one of the things that has kind of been a challenge for the CORE team. And is always a challenge for us too. We do operate shelters. We operate the two largest emergency shelters in urban Honolulu. And so we bring people in, of all different abilities and all different challenges, mental health challenges, physical health challenges. We can certainly take those folks into our shelter, but for some, a traditional shelter model they're not quite ready for that traditional shelter model. And so there has been a little bit of a challenge there in what to do with those folks who need that higher level of care, whether it be for mental health or substance abuse detox or higher level health needs when a bed isn't immediately available. So I think that's one of the challenges that they have come up against that we certainly have come up against in the past as well.
Scott, following on that, Dr. Ireland was on this program recently, and he said one of the things that he hopes is that the old state hospital could perhaps bridge that gap that Jill was just talking about. People who need, more intense services and specifically for the homeless population. Is that at all on the table? And what are your thoughts on that?
I think that certainly is something that's a possibility. I think, part of the solution is looking not only within the homeless system, but partnering with Department of Health and the healthcare community. So one example of that is about a year ago, they added an additional facility on the campus of the state hospital, a program called ECOLU, which provides short-term stabilization, not necessarily just for homeless individuals, but for people experiencing a mental health crisis. And Department of Health has expanded the number of those what we call stabilization beds across the island. In addition to that, one of the things the state is looking at is how do we actively engage the health plans, and specifically Medicaid health plans, to help address the needs of people who have more challenging physical needs, who may need assistance to shower on their own or to get accommodations and shelter. So we've now established housing coordinators within each of our 5 Medicaid health plans, and they work together with the homeless service providers to address some of these issues as they come up. So we're looking at a variety of different strategies to provide that higher level of care that Jill and Dr. Ireland have mentioned that we need.
Scott, I want to stick with you. Just talking from your experiences as being in this role for the past 7 years, you've certainly seen some trends in the way things have shifted. I think back to the beginning, just, maybe early on in your time in this role, there was a large homeless encampment down in Kaka'ako. Things have certainly changed in the landscape there, but there have been now new communities that find themselves dealing with homelessness who have maybe moved more inland, and we're getting some questions from viewers who are tuning in asking about what's being done in their neighborhoods. We're hearing from in the Palolo and Manoa streams with now people taking residence under these bridges. What's sort of the plan as as people find these shelters, so to speak, under bridges and places that are further deeper into these communities? How does the state plan to navigate through that as it spreads into different areas?
Well, I think what I encourage anyone, when you see an encampment or you see a group of people in your community that you think are not connected to help, if you can contact either my office or the city and county or an organization directly like IHS, and we can get outreach providers, homeless service providers to engage with those individuals, start building a relationship, start getting them on the pathway either to shelter or housing. The other thing I'll add is I think enforcement or cleanups are not a solution to homelessness, but what is a solution is when we add additional housing inventory in the community. So one other thing that I think really has been a game changer during the time I've been in this office is our ability to bring online different types of housing that specifically prioritize people coming out of homelessness. So these are projects such as Kahoiki Village, I think down by Nimitz and the airport is one that a lot of people know. But there's many other projects that people may not be familiar with throughout the island of Oahu and actually throughout the state that provide either tiny home housing or homes in a traditional style apartment where people can transition to. And one of the things that the state and the city and county are looking at is how do we continue to expand that and add more of that type of inventory. So just this weekend, I was at a groundbreaking for the Puhonua o Waianae, breaking ground on the private property that they own, Mauka Waianae Valley Road. And I think, the way that we continue to tackle this issue is we need to put investment in programs or projects like that add housing inventory, but housing inventory that's specifically tailored to the needs of people coming out of the situation of homelessness.
Jill, I want to ask you about the mental health component of this because we know that is so critical. Part of the issue, of course, is that you can't force someone to take services that they don't want. You can't force someone to take medication, perhaps, that they don't want. How do you navigate that part of this, and what more could be done in that arena to try to get folks the mental health services they need so they can actually accept some of the social services that you and other providers offer?
Yeah, Yenji, you just hit on kind of the biggest frustration in working in homeless services, right? Is that we know, you and I know, if we walk down the street, we see somebody in a mental health crisis and we know that they need help, but they don't always know that they need help. And so it takes, a whole team of folks to really go out and connect with people. And, first thing is just trying to build relationships and in the hopes that we can actually get them to trust us enough that they are willing to, accept the help in terms of medication. We have some great long-acting injectable antipsychotic medications that have really, really good outcomes if people are willing to accept them. But if you are, a paranoid schizophrenic and you are struggling on the street, you're not necessarily going to trust somebody that comes up and says, hey, take this, it's going to make you feel better. So we are constantly working with these individuals, as well as with the prosecutor's office and with the family courts, to try to engage folks with mental illness in more services. So, one of the things we can do is work with family members who can become guardians for people and help to advocate for their care. We also work with the courts when the family member is not present to do what's called assisted community treatment and work through the courts to get somebody into the care that we know that they need.
One of the things that I wanted to just kind of bring up is something that we hear in the community of the concerns of people being flown in, homeless individuals who maybe get flown here to Hawaii because of the tropical climates and find themselves in a position here where they like being homeless in Hawaii rather than on the East Coast during the winter. I wonder if you could put some light onto that context of how many of those individuals we're seeing. What percentage of the homeless population in Hawaii does that take up, and how is that dealt with? Maybe Jill, we'll start with you with that.
Sure. Yeah, we see a steady trickle of people coming from the mainland, probably every week. And it ranges from people, sometimes people will call us ahead of time and say, hey, I'm living in a homeless shelter in Albany, and I'd like to come and stay with you guys in January. Is that going to work? As though we're a hotel, waiting to open our doors to tourists that are coming. And then we also have people who come here, maybe not necessarily intending to be homeless, but they come with $2,000 in their pocket and run through that very quickly. Or they come to maybe live with a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a long lost spouse that the relationship doesn't work out, and then they very quickly wind up on the streets. And so there are various different things that bring people here from the mainland. I know it's been kind of a pervasive myth that different states are sending their homeless individuals here. And we don't have a lot of evidence that shows that that's the case, but we do certainly have a lot of people who come here intending to be homeless or intending to start a new life that doesn't work out that well for them. So in our shelters, we probably have at any given time between 10 and 20% of our shelter guests are here from somewhere else, recent arrivals.
And Jill, just sticking with you for a second on that, what can be done to mitigate some of that? I mean, obviously, if you get that call from Albany, you can discourage that person in the moment. But once that person is here, what can be done to either reunite them with family or, just to make sure that they're not taking resources that could be that are necessary for Hawaii residents, since those are the vast majority of the people that need the help?
Yeah, we know that there are so many people here that are from here that need help. And so we definitely want to help people who come from other places, but we also want to encourage them to maybe return to those places if that's a possibility. So one of the first questions that we ask folks when they're coming into our shelters is, are you from somewhere else? And is there anything that could be done to return you back where you came from? And so some people will just say categorically no, but we'll still kind of continue to work with them, especially if their job prospects are minimal. And so one of the things that we do try to do is find their family on the mainland, reconnect them with parents or siblings that might be interested in supporting them on the mainland. And so a lot of times we'll find, we just sent a woman back to her daughter in Maryland a couple of weeks ago. We have people who come here and then find themselves in the hospital and are sick and really want to be back with families. And so we do have a program where we can kind of offset the price of a plane ticket to help them get back home, as long as we know that they're kind of landing in a safe place, that we're not just going to give them a one-way ticket and their bags, and they're going to go be, somebody else's problem somewhere else. We want to make sure that they'll be safe wherever they go. And so that's one of the services that we provide.
I want to bring in another question from the audience. Heidi is asking a question. We'll address this to Scott. What percent of the homeless population are working and can't afford housing? Scott, if you can maybe take that question. We know that there are different profiles of what a homeless person may look like, or what we may think in the context of their working abilities and income that's coming in. And we know the high cost of living here in Hawaii. But can you provide any context into Heidi's question about the population that are working but maybe just can't afford housing?
So I don't have exact numbers, but I think if you look at the point in time count, especially point in time count for Oahu that Partners in Care, our homeless provider coalition, conducts every year, the number one reason why people say they fall into homelessness is an inability to pay rent or to afford the cost of housing or cost of living here. And I think it's to just put it into context, when we talk about affordable housing, typically we look at it in terms of area median income, and what we talk about as being affordable or lower income tends to be 60% or 50% of the area median income. But for the homeless population that Jill and I work with, we're talking about people who are 10% of the AMI or less. As an example, for a single disabled individual who's receiving Social Security benefits, their income is only about $800 a month. Or for someone who's receiving state benefits, it's even lower than that. It's less than $400 a month. So we're talking about people who are on very limited income. I think when we're looking at helping to create pathways for people out of homelessness, we're looking at trying to see, well, how can we provide them a wraparound supports to connect them not only to benefits, but also to employment so they can slowly increase their income over time. IHS has a number of employment programs together with their shelter and housing programs that they offer. In particular, they have a program called Headed to Work, which helps people to be able to get connected to employment or job training. And they have other programs that help people provide those opportunities, kind of lift them out of the situation that they're seeing.
Yeah, Jill, can you expand on that as well for Heidi's question? Because there is this perception among some that homeless people are, either homeless by choice or they don't want to work and things like that. But we do know, especially given what Scott just laid out in terms of the social services, the benefits, they're so minimal that a lot of people, even if they do work maybe part-time or they are receiving some of these benefits, they just can't afford to live here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that is sort of, well known within our state is that, about 50%, over 50% of our population is living paycheck to paycheck, right? And so everybody is sort of one paycheck away from being in a situation where they might be in a homeless crisis. So, when we look at the total population, if you look at that point in time count, about 50% of those, maybe a little bit more, or actually at this point, 60% of those are unsheltered. 40% are sheltered. And of the unsheltered population, a lot of those are chronically homeless. And those we know are not, are not our working homeless. When we look at our sheltered homeless, we do have more folks that are working homeless or are at least working towards working and maybe have worked in the past and just kind of need to get back into a rhythm of working, need to get kind of re-employed, many of whom are educated and therefore underemployed. And so part of that Headed to Work program that Scott's talking about, getting people to re-enter the workforce if they have been out of the workforce for a long time can be really challenging. They have gaps in resumes. They probably lack a lot of relevant skills, and lack the confidence to just kind of walk into a place that's going to give them a job that's going to give them a living wage. They might get, a minimum wage job, but it's not enough to support a family or to buy a house or, to, afford their rent. And so, it's a real challenge when we look at this population and we look at the job prospects and how that matches up with the housing prospects. There's this real disconnect. So what we're trying to do is kind of stop the cycle of homelessness. And part of that is going to be workforce development, trying to get people related job skills and education that's going to help them get better jobs that can then support their household expenses as well. So, so we have pre-vocational programs that are designed to do that. And then, the more that we can work with employers that are willing to kind of take risks to train people would be a huge value to our community as well.
Our time this morning is almost up, but before we go, Scott, I wanted to begin this question with you, and Jill will give you an opportunity to answer this as well. But looking forward, we know there's no magic bullet to solving this issue. But what do you think are some of the steps that need to be taken in the next few years to make a substantive difference in what we're seeing right now? And what would you like to see maybe the state do or the next administration tackle to make sure that this is a priority and an issue that continues to remain top of mind?
Well, I think, like I mentioned, I think one of the biggest things we can do is look specifically at housing inventory, how we can continue partnering with not only the city and county, but all 4 counties to find opportunities where we can build projects like Kahoiki Village, like the Kohale, that add housing with supportive services for this population. We know we're facing a housing challenge overall, but particularly for this population, I think it's something that's a critical need. In addition to that, I think it's also looking at how do we expand existing partnerships with mental health providers and substance abuse treatment providers to address the needs of those who have more challenging ongoing behavioral health concerns.
Yeah, and Jill, we'll let you have the last word on this. What specifically, a new legislative session is coming up in just a few months. Of course, we will have a new administration taking the 5th floor at the Capitol. What would you like to see happen to continue that momentum when you're talking about that 60% decline for families? How do we increase those gains, not just for that particular population, but the entire homeless population?
I'm going to double down for the most part on what Scott had to say in terms of supportive housing and developing supportive housing solutions. With the population that we're talking about of folks that we really want to move out of homelessness, affordable housing is one thing, but really those supportive services are such a critical element to ensuring that we have a place where people can go beyond homelessness if they are suffering with mental illness, if they are suffering with other conditions that limit their ability to work or engage, meaningfully in other ways, and certainly to live independently. But there is definitely, a shortage there in where we can put people. And when I think about our existing shelters and our existing shelter capacity, there's been a lot of question about, do we have enough shelters to accommodate our homeless individuals? But shelter's not an end in itself, right? Housing is the end. So the quicker we can move people out of shelter and into housing, the more space we have available to bring people in and kind of keep them funneling through. So those supportive housing solutions are critically important, focusing on mental health, ensuring that we have access to treatment for people who need it, both in the immediate term and the long term, are really the things that are going to help us see a significant difference in moving that chronically homeless population off the street.
Okay, Jill Wright and Scott Morishige, thank you so much for joining us this morning and sharing some insights into what's happening with our homeless population, and just for all the work that you do for our community. We know that this is an issue that at times gets a lot of negative attention, and there's just a lot that's happening over time, but we certainly appreciate you joining us and just for all that you continue to do for our community. So thanks so much.
Thanks for making the time.
Thank you.
Hello. Well, great to hear from them. And it was very important to get that context, Ryan. I thought it was really interesting to say that we're seeing all these gains. They noted that from 2015 to now, there's been a 60% decline in homeless families and especially focusing on children that are homeless, that we're not seeing nearly as much of that as we had in the past. That is some very, very good news. That said, there are still so many challenges, particularly with that mental health component. They did note, though, that the CORE program is helping. And it does sound like the biggest issue, of course, like everything else in this state, it all comes back to housing.
Yeah, and it's an issue that, of course, we've been hearing time and time again during the campaign season, again, being reiterated in this campaign cycle with many different proposals about how to tackle this. But as we heard there towards the end, it's more than just being able to afford this and provide this affordable housing. It's the services that wrap around that ensure that these individuals are able to sustain not only an income, but create a living for themselves and a sustainable future, and making sure that they have access to some of the programs that are not necessarily at the funding that I think a lot of people think that it needs to be in order to tackle the number of issues that we are seeing. But good to hear some of the numbers and just the comparisons of how far we've come on this issue. Certainly a long way left to go, but progress is being made.
Yeah, and wonderful to hear all of that. We appreciate them checking in with us, and we will check again with them in a few months when the legislative session starts, because we know that this is always a big topic for the budget and for plenty of lawmakers as they hear from their constituents, as we heard from you in the comments, people seeing this in their communities and really wanting to address this issue. On Wednesday, Ryan, we're delving back into the world of politics. We'll be heading over to Maui to talk to two men who would like to be the next mayor.
Yeah, it should be an interesting conversation as the mayor's race narrows in here as we head towards the home stretch of this election. It is expected to be a tight race, so we're going to give our viewers on Maui County as throughout the state an opportunity to hear from the two candidates and ask your questions. We encourage you to tune on in here for that conversation with the candidates for Maui Mayor on Wednesday. Until then, take care, and we'll see you right back here on Wednesday. Aloha.
Aloha.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.